There are less flattering parts of the horse to which one can be compared. Thank you very much. I appreciate this moment. My remarks are largely developed from some notes I've taken before we arrived, but also in some fairly intense note-taking while we've been here. So I didn't actually have a prepared text before. That was rather deliberate because I kind of understood that part of what I need to do is just kind of hear and think about what I think has been a very, very fruitful series of discussions and presentations and contributions, and so I'm very grateful. I've taken notes. So because of some of the things that I have here, which is more than I will be able to kind of comment on, I think there may be a paper that comes out of it afterwards, as I have time to reflect upon some things. So I'll just kind of break it up into some vignettes. First, starting with my own experience of just listening in my own diocese to the folks. I love the people very much. I think most every bishop will say that. But we all sense it in a different way. But the experience of the Synod, when I was talking, I would go, the way we organized it is we gathered some delegates, just some folks from the parishes, mostly people who were somehow involved. It was right after COVID. We were trying to get this organized. And we worked on some things, and they had the listening sessions in the parishes. We tried really hard to get the apostolic movements. It's not so easy sometimes to kind of get into that. The apostolic movements are largely integrated in situations that are multi-parish based, and they're very influential on the apostolic life of the diocese in terms of their spirituality and evangelization, their charismatic renewal. Most of it is in Spanish. A lot of it is bilingual, but we did a lot of that. But when I started listening, because I went by deanery to kind of listen to the delegates, and I just sat there, I said, my job here is I'm going to ask you to let me know what you heard. And I would sit there and take notes, which I did, and just give a brief response afterwards. A couple of things about what people first almost always led with when they were talking to me about what they had heard of their parishes, what their people were saying. One, they were very happy to have a chance to say something. En español decimos como se desahogaron, no? It's like they had all this built in and they had to get out of their system. That's partly because of just some of the many things we've talked about, over the last couple of days, but it's also because of the trauma that we really haven't quite unpacked that COVID caused. It's still with us. Also, we had come out of a fairly brutal election thing, and it polarized people. It made people angry. People weren't talking to each other, and then people were accusing the priest of being a politician of either one party or another. There was all sort of that sort of thing. What they appreciated was, yes, they had a chance to talk about what their hopes were and what their anxieties were, but they were just glad to be able to get together. And one of the aspects of that it wasn't so much so the bishop can hear this or so this can go. It was just to talk to each other in a small group. And I think we perhaps don't appreciate the value of a small group, where they don't necessarily all know each other really well, but they're members of the same community. Maybe they know what pew they sit in, because you can always tell, who's not there. They may not know the name, but esa señora pues ya no está sentada. She's not sit there anymore. So, but they got together. They knew people, and kind of not so well, but they never talked about their faith before. Doesn't come easily to us, and they really appreciated the chance. Not, like I said, not that the hierarchy will ultimately hear what we have to say, because I don't think that was necessarily where they were with this. It was, somebody's going to speak to me about their experience of faith, and I'm going to speak to them about my experience of faith. People found that new, they found that very moving, and they found that very enlivening. And so they walked out of it with a sense of joy that we were kind of together for a little while, away from the polarizing tendencies which are very strong in the church, although I think we're more aware of them than a lot of our people are. But also because of just the polarizing character of American society. The vaccine was polarizing. I still have people who don't go to Mass on Sunday, not because they don't want to go to Mass, but because they've decided that it's not good for me to get vaccinated, so I guess the only opportunity I have is to stay at home. I don't know how they boxed themselves into that, but they did. But the people are a lot of different places on this participation thing. But participation was very important, and I think there's a basic joy. And in that sense, it kind of uncovers for me a sense that synodality is both something new, this experience of calling people together and just letting them talk in a spiritual way and listen to each other and encouraging people to listen. This is something new, but then it's really very old. I mean, this is not new in the church's experience. In some way, it's been interrupted for us in the experience of the American church in a lot of ways, and our people have experienced that. It's been interrupted by political dynamics. It was interrupted by there's racial and there's linguistic dynamics there. There's all sorts of things that have made it difficult to sit down and just be happy with the fact that we all, in some way, are related to the church and we're here together. It's a basic thing. It's very simple, but we should not underestimate how powerful it is in the lives of people, especially when they experience culture is largely divisive, largely angry, and largely don't talk to me because you disagree with what I think or because you are that different. So it's a basic and a simple thing. As you know, I myself do think the Holy Father is a theologian. I also think he's a pastor. But he's also a great reader of kind of intuitively sensing the moment in the church. And I think one of the things that I myself, I don't have any personal sort of contact with the Holy Father in terms of what his mind is, but you read his documents, he's been thinking about this for a long time. You go back to Evangelii Gaudium, he's already establishing this understanding that there's the folks that are with us by coming to our activities, and then the people who have faith, which is a great number, but they are not with us. He describes that. And then there are those who have not met Jesus. And we have a mission all the way out, but you have to kind of start with folks who are with us. But those who are estranged for one reason or another, indifference, whatever. But my gut tells me that inside of himself, the Holy Father thinks that our mission, because the mission is going to be, at the end, he's always talking about the mission is debilitated in us, and not just in the United States, but worldwide, but we have a particular experience of the debilitation. And we have a job to kind of analyze that and ask ourselves what our people are sensing, which I'll talk a little bit more about a little bit later. But our mission is debilitated because our communion is unsure of itself as a practical thing. One of the things that COVID did is didn't just interrupt the masses. By the way, when I had a synodal session where somebody says, "Well, Bishop, you didn't consult us when you decided to shut down the masses," and there was anger there. Sometimes you got to make a call. But even our parish festivals, which are huge events for the whole community, people get together, they laugh, they sing, there's food, and there's it's one of the few, we should appreciate this about the church, it's one of the few multi-generational events that communities have anymore. Because they're experiencing life is divided up into pieces and generations, and with parents who don't even know how to talk to their kids, not because they speak a different language, because they don't, but because they speak social media language. And parents, pues, ¿qué es eso, padre? Okay. So this is an experience that I think, and the Holy Father kind of says that we have, our mission is debilitated because our communion is unsure of itself, and our participation is weakening, right? And we need to address that. And I think I think as an intuition, as a pastor, he's saying, look, we need to start at the beginning. That is, we start with people talking to each other as Catholics, as the baptized, as a sense of a people, and recover our sense of what ultimately holds us together before we start doing the disputing thing. Because if we don't get to what holds us together, which is not of us, it is of God, then neither the communion nor the participation is real in the way people kind of experience it. And there's a hopefulness there, but we have to start with the basic. And this is why, and it was the small groups, which I think made a big difference for people. And yes, they were glad that Bishop got a report, and then I kind of have been talking to folks because I go around and talk to the delegates. I told the delegates, don't think I'm going to let you go because I need you to help us implement this, because a lot of what came from it was not a surprise to me, but it was articulated very heartfelt way about what the diocese needs to be working on. And it's not a surprise. I think, that a lot of the priorities, it's the mission, it's the poor, it's the youth, it's people, Bishop, people haven't come back to Mass. I said, well, go across the street and knock on the door. Hay que preguntarles, no, but I can't do that, I'm not ready. That I can't do that because I'm not ready comes out in the national synthesis as people sense a lack of formation for the mission. But in my life, Bishop, I can't do that, I'm not ready. What if they ask me questions? Well, then you say, pues no sé, I don't know. But I'll ask somebody. But I just miss you at Mass. You could say that. And you can say that better than I can. Bueno, okay, so that this said, but the other element which I think we shouldn't underestimate is that it was a prayerful experience. On the local level, it was prayerful. We are not real comfortable. I think the church that has roots in Latin America is a little bit more comfortable, a lot more comfortable, frankly, with that than maybe some of our other parishes. But it's something that people adjusted to. They prayed. Sometimes they had a meditation, a lectio divina. But they thought this was a beautiful. This is great. Bishop, can we have all of our meetings like this? Actually, I told the Presbyteral Council, if there's one thing that comes from the Synod is that we should start having, a little lectio before we start deciding what the agenda and how much time we have to finish the agenda. Because we're putting we're practically acting like Pelagians. In that we aren't trusting that the God's grace is what moves the whole thing. And that no structure, no organization, no fiddling with the edges is going to mean anything if people aren't in touch with the grace that moves them. Grace moves us. The only reason doctrine and grace illuminates the mind is that it might move the heart. But if we don't have time to let the word enter that moves the heart, then we're just going to be tinkering with the structures, hoping the structure will generate a movement. Structures do not generate movements. The grace of the Holy Spirit that moves us to the love of Jesus generates movement and love for my neighbor, and never separating the two. That's what. So the prayer thing, it's. I think one of the gifts is if we can start integrating that into the way we do meetings. I mean, one of the things that, was a lot of comments that were made in it, but this should become normative. In parishes, why can't you, throughout different times, all points at certain times of the year, just invite people to come and have little groups and talk about Lent, talk about the newly baptized, talk about the youth, just invite in other words, this is a way to begin rebuilding the sense of participation in communion, because without that, we're never going to get to the mission. And if the communion remains as stressed as it is, then we're too busy trying to figure out how to fix that instead of going out and doing something about the mission. So the small groups, the prayer. When I say it's a new thing, it's because it's new in the experience. We can do sociological, I think we need to, historical study as to what's happened in the last 50 years that has caused this fraction, but we're experiencing it. Our people are. It's perhaps one of the works of theologians is to kind of get more deeply into kind of what has caused that. But knowing the cause is not necessarily going to help us address, the reality. They're crying to us for we need to be together more, Bishop. We really do. And the prayer part of it. When I say it's also old, I think this is very patristic. I read the Fathers. I think one of the only purposes of Twitter is so I can put translations of St. Augustine up there, and they can deal with it, right? So, but you read Augustine's sermons, for example, and they're very, he asks questions. I don't think they're just rhetorical questions. I was reading one of his sermons on 1 John the other day, and he says, and here's 1 John, the apostle says, we must walk as he walked. And then he asks the question, do you think he's asking us to walk on the water? I mean, he's doing a rhetorical back and forth because the people are yelling back to him. And there's that kind of interaction, the patristic sense of talking to the people, announcing something. This is the Augustine who tells us, the Christ I speak to you is the Christ who's already in your heart, who responds to me. Because the word announced and the word in the heart recognizes one. That's the resonance of which the Holy Father speaks. The resonance of the word announced in the hearts of the faithful who accept it because they recognize, I know my sheep hear my voice. This is something that you can live if you just kind of let people have that space. So it is old, and we are in a recovery operation. I think our people are more battered by the experience, not just of the church, but of the culture in general, as being quite dehumanizing. Because it doesn't lend itself to a sense of communion. That is, of being in relation to others. We've been taught that we are individuals and we choose our relationships. The church comes out and says, no, you don't. We're all human beings and we're all kind of related, whether you like it or not, and we're the baptized. And I tell my people, one of the signs that this is the true church is you cannot control the person who sits next to you in the pew. Just like Peter couldn't control when Paul spoke up. And the apostles, Jesus didn't say, follow me, but no, you have to love each other, because if you don't love each other, that is, if you don't work together as a people, you can't be my follower. There's an us implicit in the call. And so I think this is what we have to live that in a way that kind of pushes against this notion that we're all normatively autonomous and all of our relations are chosen because I want to. We are born into a world in relation, and we are baptized into a communion of relation. And this cannot be separated. I think we don't do so well in this culture of speaking about how that cannot be separated, which is why the Eucharist is intimately a message of social justice. But people aren't hearing that, and I think that's a mirror back to the pastors. Why aren't they hearing that? And how are we giving them opportunities to live that anyway? It needs to be a normative thing that we need to move towards. I think, one of the beauties of listening to the folks, one of the things I tell my secretaries, don't put me so many appointments one after the other. I know everybody wants. I said, give me a little space. I can walk outside, maybe go for a little chat, or I need to go to the CVS or something because I get stopped and people ask me things. And that's an important moment in my ministry, I will tell you honestly, is to allow myself to be out there and get stopped by somebody. Ay, Señor Obispo, now that I have you here, let me tell you. And so, and you didn't know what Father said? Oh my goodness, but we got to have a direct access, because the danger for an overly institutionalized reality of any kind is that all the information is filtered and is determined by others what the bishop hears and what he doesn't hear. We've got to open up the space where you go walking down the aisles of the HEB or stand in the line at the Stripes where you can get a really good taquito on Sunday morning, because that's where they are. This is the listening thing. It's a beautiful thing, but you got to hear how people say it. And this, one of the remarks that was made yesterday, one of the fears was that we are wordy readers, and we are. We are all very wordy. I'm probably the wordiest amongst you, right? Just like words. I think one of the roles of a theologian is to be a good translator. And to translate, you have to know both languages. And I'm not talking about English-Spanish or English-French, because I've been working on the Continental Synod part of the things, and the French church is an important element to try to understand in Canada. In any case, translators, that is, you need to, your professional disciplines are very important, but also you got to hear how people talk about the faith, because there's a great wisdom there. But if we don't have the ear to kind of be able to understand it on its own terms, we might dismiss it, or we might say, well, no, that's kind of a naive thing, or we might immediately try to categorize it. There is great wisdom. St. Thomas used to talk in his commentary on the Creed, of the Vetula. Some of you remember this. The Vetula, he said, the Vetula has more wisdom in her little finger than all of the books of Aristotle, he says at the beginning of the commentary. Who's the Vetula? Well, I would say in my diocese, she's the little old lady who helps in the sacristy. But you got to know her language, how she speaks, how she prays, what she worries about. There's great wisdom there. We need to translate for each other, but you can't do that just by going and putting a microphone. That's why in this setting, I myself think that for the future of synodality in the United States, which is a long-term thing, this synod will come and it will have its fruit and it will come back to us. But if we're going to take seriously this reality, then we have to do some serious work. And so I would say, I would invite any of you who would like to come and spend a week or two at Sister Norma's Respite Center and help us make sandwiches and mop the floors and talk to the mothers and the children. Do it for 2 weeks and then ask them a question. Because otherwise, you're kind of on the outside of it. I think not every theologian needs to do this, but I think we need theologians who do that. I've heard the confessions of some of these kids who are coming from Honduras and Guatemala. I know what their hearts are about. We have no idea. No idea, unless you talk to them. And I will tell you, as much as we rightly critique the church internally about what our failures are, which are many, I will tell you this, for an immigrant kid who's 15 from Honduras, he doesn't trust the government, he doesn't trust the Border Patrol, he doesn't trust the police, but he does trust the church. Unmerited as it is, it's a grace from God, but do not, which means listen and try to take it from what he's saying or what she's saying. You got to, otherwise you're missing. There's great power in the faith there. Do we or do we not believe, and I do, what the Holy Father says when he says that we must learn from the faith of the poor? Now, we may think that's a nice rhetorical thing, but actually I believe it. The Church of the United States, I'm just one amongst, we divided up yesterday in Raphael's talk there. There's the one, there's the few, and there's the all. Well, in the few, which would be the bishops and the College of Bishops and that whole thing, well, I do believe it, that the future of the Church of the United States is going to depend a lot on how we actually learn from the poor and their experience of faith. And the only way to do that is to live amongst them for a while, or go serve them for a while, or go visit the detention centers and visit them that way. And that's the immigrant, that's the racial minority that lives, in a very out of the way place. It's a newly arrived from Afghanistan. It could be just you in the periphery is right across the street if you know how to find it. And I think we have to become ourselves more agile at finding it. So yes, we need to kind of, I think, have a conversion of how to hear the wisdom of the poor in terms of that, which is I think one of the synod process, we had to start somewhere. It's like jumping in the water and you start to swim and you find out when you don't swim so well. In some things, we did not swim well at all. But at least we know now what we don't do so well. There's a lot to be said for negative knowledge, right? What you didn't do so well. We did not reach the periphery of the poor very well. For example, the undocumented are not going to come and talk to a mixed group about their status. They're just not going to do it. They're afraid. They trust the church, but they don't necessarily know, but ¿quién es ese señor que está preguntando? Who is this guy who's asking me? Because they're coming from governments. This is our experience. And the immigrants are not just on the border. They're in every diocese in this country. Because they don't stay on the Rio Grande Valley. They go up, todo el mundo tiene primo en Chicago, right? Everybody has a cousin in Chicago. So that's where they go. Or Washington, if you're from El Salvador, or wherever else. But this sense of this is I don't think we did it so well. But I do think, getting back to this point, that we do need to kind of we need to kind of think about how we're going to do it better. And it does going to take a pastoral conversion. in terms of the whole synodal process. Otherwise, as Hoffman said, otherwise we do have the temptation to sit on our basically upper middle class sense of who belongs in the church. This will kill us. It already is. If the poor don't feel welcome, porque se visten muy bonito, they dress really nice in church, and I don't feel like I can go there, then rightly does St. James himself from his letter point his finger at us. The pastoral conversion is for all of us. Empezando no con su servidor, and starting with me. We have to at least know what we're not doing well and know that this is vital for the future because there is something the poor can teach us. And by the poor, I mean the vulnerable in general. I don't mean only the economically poor, but the vulnerable in general. If you read Spanish, there's a novel by Javier Sicilia, who's a Mexican novelist, and you really do need La Confesión, right? The Juan Matoros. It's La Confesión. Look it up. But this man knows about the vulnerable poor and about the spirituality of the cross and how they live it. You have to know Javier Sicilia's story to kind of know how he knows that. But anyway, I just think this is heavy on my heart, let me just say. The poor are any of the vulnerable for whom the others make decisions about whether they live or die. I've got 12,000 people in Reynosa, Texas, waiting to cross into McAllen, and 10,000 people in Matamoros, Mexico, waiting to cross into Brownsville. And they're waiting for whoever makes those decisions. They are completely vulnerable before the power of the world. And the power of the world is largely economic right now. Who decides? But the vulnerable are all over the place. They're in our own backyards, they're in our own front yards, they're in our parishes, or they want to be. So do we have something important to learn from them? Yes, we do. And so as I'm kind of working through this, I just think that we need to kind of like think how the conversion works in us as pastors, as theologians, as who are genuinely wanting to say there's something vital here that if we don't listen to people, we're going to lose it. And if we lose it, we're losing Jesus himself. It's that vital, right? So one other point, I was just going through my notes here. It's very important, the charismatic voices in the church. My question is, how do you hear them without institutionalizing them? Because as soon as we institutionalize them, we make them into our own image. I'm talking about the charismatic movements. I'm talking about the apostolic sort of vibrancy that's out there. It's very active if you know how to kind of listen to it. But how do you listen to it? I'm also talking about the little old lady who basically goes to Mass every Sunday and prays for her 29 grandchildren and their many great-grandchildren. She lives the faith this way. How do you hear that? How do you do that? I had people come, Bishop, I'm a chaplain at the hospital. I can't do a synodal listening session. I said, well, look, nobody's expecting you to kind of get a group of 6 people in the hospital, but you can go and you can kind of have a conversation and just ask them, how has the church helped you? How has the church not helped you? How could we help you more? Just have a conversation. Have we forgotten how to talk to each other? Yes, we have. This is a very deep problem. How do we listen to the charismatic voices, the Catherine of Siena's out there, without institutionalizing them? Because then we just make them into another image of ourselves. It's not wrong being the image of ourselves, but we don't need to remake people into it. I want to say something about the one, the few, and the all, which comes up. There was in March of 2018, the International Theological Commission published the document on synodality, which is very important. And he does go more. The commission goes more into the one, the few, and the many, and the communion thing, and how it works, and the mutual spiration. It's a very beautiful document. But we know who the one is in the primacy. We know that. We know kind of who the few are. That's the College of Bishops have a responsibility. In my view, it's not rocket science. The Pope wants us to listen to our people, carry them in our hearts, and carry them when we go speak to him. It's not rocket science. What I think the Holy Father intuits is that in many parts of the world, bishops need help learning how to listen to their people. So let us try this, you know. El Papa da mucha sorpresa. No, the Pope likes to surprise us. But I think that's the bottom line. Listen to your people and carry them with you, kind of in that St. Ignatius of Antioch spirituality that says the bishop carries his people sacramentally within himself, right? And so I salute the church in Smyrna because, as Ignatius of Antioch would say, but you carry that. There's part of this. That's how the communion works. You do have a responsibility to hear it. So I think that's important. But the one, the many, the all. It's true. We only got 700,000 people that we talked to, which was the beginning. You know, you got to start somewhere. That's 700,000 people we didn't hear from before. So there it is. But my question is, and it's a question. We're never going to get to the all in terms of the actual sitting down. So what? Because and the Pope has said this many times. It's not an opinion poll, and it's not a political sort of gathering. What is it? It's a theological thing. And we have to figure out what it is when you have. So what is it? People ask me, what is it that happened, Bishop? You didn't get very many. You know, this is like 0.9% or whatever, 1% or whatever. That's true. I said, well, what did we get? Well, we got 700,000 people who were willing to make the trek from their homes to the church and bare their hearts about what it means to be a Catholic for them. That is not nothing. Especially in an era when rightly they are skeptical of what's the motive, what's the game, what's the plan. You know, it's who's running the levers behind the curtain, right? On this one, what's the plan? Everybody's suspicious. We are living in the age of extreme suspicion of anything institutional. So we do this. So what is it? Well, I would say this. I think maybe we can develop a theological insight into how the baptized also carry each other. Because the grace unites the baptized. And you get one person who comes, and they're speaking also in the name of many. We don't know who those many are, but no one can speak only from themselves once they've been baptized. I do think there's something there. It's not just the bishop who bears the body of the church. The members of the baptized bear each other. When they go to Mass, when they go talk to the bishop, you know. I don't really have an office. I have a conference room because almost always it's a group. And it's a group because they todos quieren give it. Okay, fine. You get, you know, and I think of bishops, you know, some groups you don't want to meet with, but you got to meet with them. And you got to sit there and you got to listen to it. And sometimes all you can say after I've gotten a complete, description of what's going wrong in parish so-and-so over there, I was like, I'm just sorry you've had to go to that. And now I'm going to see what I can do. That's all you can say. And I can't make a promise, ¿por qué no? Es que they know, people know. I mean, they have mercy on us. They do. Yo sé, señores, no so easy. Anyway, so there's a sense of that the baptized carry each other. That's a theological mystery. It's not about what percentage you got. Obviously, we want more participation. Obviously, we're never going to get to the 100% of the all. But that's not really the point now, is it? It's about getting the participating voice that goes, that contributes to the mission in the communion of the bishop, who then takes along with other people. He's not the only one who goes and talks to the Holy Father at the Synod, but he goes, he takes it, but the baptized do that too. He offers it as part of the communion of the church under the primacy and our communion and co-responsibility, those sorts of things. I think it's important that we kind of at least think about the all and how it's sacramentally manifested in the sacramental life of the church. Okay, I'm moving along. I'm almost done. I said 2018, the Synodality document came out of the International Commission, but the Holy Father issued his document on the new structure of the Synod in September of that same year. They're both very much worth reading. Pope Francis thinks the long game. He's been planning for this for a long time. And you go back and read Evangelii Gaudium, and the Gaudium Evangelii, and all sorts of things. And we've got to recover the sense of the communion so we can be enlivened in the mission. one of the things in the Synodality document from the International Commission, which I think is very fine, but I'm struck by how the paradigm that the theologians used in that commission offers Acts 15, the Council of Jerusalem, which everybody says is it was mightily important. That's kind of the first expression of how the voices were heard and how the decision was made in James and his relation to, and then Paul. But what I think is perhaps we should resist over idealizing that event, because we know from St. Paul's letters that even though the decision was made, it was not always received. Paul is still battling the same issue with the Galatians, and so just because you had a synod and the apostles have decided with the help of the Holy Spirit that this is what's going to be binding on the community and generally is accepted, that doesn't mean like, ya se acabó. There's a question of reception. And Paul goes running around all over the known world trying to kind of get some reception here. So we shouldn't be surprised if it's going to be a little bit rough in moving. You're going to lose some folks. Some could not accept what the Council of Jerusalem decided. Well, so synodality, I think, in the United States, now here's where I think we just need to focus. For us, it's a long-term thing. Something should become normative. I think structures need to be transformed. I would make this point about structures, and I'm just one, right? Yo no hablo para nadie más. I don't speak for anybody else. I wonder if after the Second Vatican Council, when the institution of Episcopal conferences was kind of promoted around the world, if it didn't suddenly become the instrument by which we figured we'd never have to have a synod again. Because it is, if you listen, when I hear on social media them talking about the bishops or the USCCB, I can only think of the image in Star Trek: The Next Generation of the Borg, right? It's this big thing that flies through space, and it has these tentacles, and it controls even Picard, right? So it's a monster. Now, the USCCB does some things very, very well, but I think we need to rethink how it's structured in a way that conduces to a synodal sort of expression that can happen periodically in the life of the local church. I don't think a conference was meant to do everything that the communion of bishops is supposed to do in a body of the nation. It's my own view, so it needs to be rethought. So that's going to be an issue for reception. Whatever comes from Rome after 24, I assume will be generally quite general, but we're going to have to do some work locally to receive it. Now maybe, ¿quién soy yo? No, I'm nobody. I like being in the very smallest corner of South Texas. I really do. I tell my people I am the happiest bishop in the United States. I really am. But my point is that at some point we're going to have to sit down and think as a church in the United States how to make some of this normative on a more national, spirational sort of level. And maybe that's not something a conference was meant to do. The synod is a more ancient thing. We don't even know theologically what a conference actually means. We know what a synod means in some way, because we have a tradition of that. How does that fit? I think we're going to have to think about that. And maybe we need to, maybe for us, and this is just me, maybe after 24, we do some thinking as bishops and as a people of God here. How are we going to implement locally what the Holy Father is saying is needed for the world? Because it has to be implemented. That, to me, would be a topical thing that we may want to do a next round of synodal discussion about. And then we're not just asking, how do you feel about the church today? We're asking, what can we do to kind of better cohere in our communion for the sake of the mission? And I'm just gonna move to the issue of the mission, and that is, there are a lot of ways to describe the mission. I think we hit something very important yesterday when we said there's a little bit of an ambivalence in people. Is it social justice? Is it personal salvation? Is it me and Jesus? There's lots of ways it's been fractured, the discussion of the mission. I would just close with this. I was very moved last night after the dinner. The dinner was very nice, by the way. Thank you very much. I went to my room and I checked the internet and I saw a clip of the funeral mass for Bishop David O'Connell. And it was the entrance procession of the casket. Los Angeles Cathedral was packed. And they were singing St. Patrick's breastplate. And you know, it's a very ancient thing. Christ with me, Christ before me, Christ behind me, Christ in me, Christ beneath me, Christ above me, Christ on my right, Christ on my left. They were singing it as the deacons brought the casket in. You see, this is it. In the end, a bishop and his people must give a witness to adherence to Christ. That he's the only reason we do anything. That the work of the Spirit is to keep us faithful to a person. And that we have to, and Christ has one great end, right, which is heading towards the eschaton and so forth, the heavenly city, the heavenly Jerusalem, the eternal sort of. But it's also the love of neighbor. It's also feeding the poor. It's also attending to the forgotten. It's also, there's so many things Christ is in himself. But if you want the unity of the mission, it has to be in the Christological form. That the Spirit comes to take us more deeply into Jesus. And we go, what is the mission? We want our bishops to be faithful to death to Jesus for the sake of his people. And so when we're doing the dialogue thing, and it was brought up how important dialogue, and it's kind of his delicate balance with the issue of mission, in the end we can dialogue because the question is, why do you do what you do, O Christian? And it should be a question of the Christian. O Christian, why do you do what you do? And if we cannot answer, because it is as Jesus would have me do. If we can't answer it that way, why are we doing it? And the people, the early church, the martyrs, Ignatius, his love for his people, he died also for them to give that witness. And the people who are willing to, because in the end, that's all we're going to have to say for ourselves in this world. I tried to live my life faithful to what Jesus entrusted to us. And so we stumble along this road, imperfect as we are, but that, go and look for that clip as they sang that, as that casket was being brought down to the people were all in tears. They deeply loved this man. And they deeply loved the fact that he deeply loved Jesus. And he loved them. That's kind of the church. Broken as it is, we still give that witness. And in any condition, we are called to give that witness. And so I have so many other things, but I'm going to stop because it's 11:33 and the Borg must go back to the seating. So anyway, thank you all very much. It's been very rich, and maybe I'll continue to think about this, but I've been very moved by this participation of all of you. Thank you.